Nellie was born into a world that had already decided what her life was supposed to be: poor, Irish, female. In rural County Tipperary in the late 1800s, those three things alone could narrow a person's future before they were even old enough to understand it. By the time Nellie could reach the counter of the family store, she was already working. Outside the shop, the hills of Ireland rolled endlessly green. They were beautiful, but beauty did not feed Nellie's 11 younger siblings. Beauty did not create opportunity, and for generations opportunity had been in short supply across much of Ireland. For centuries the Irish had lived under English rule, land ownership, wealth, political power, education. Nearly all of it rested somewhere else, in someone else's hands. Irish Catholic families in the countryside survived through endurance, faith, stubbornness, and family loyalty. Then came the Great Famine. Beginning in 1845, the potato crop failed again and again. Millions starved, millions more fled. Entire villages vanished from the map. Families watched children die, while food grown on Irish land continued to leave for England. Even decades later, long after the famine officially ended, its shadow still lingered over families like Nellie's. And so for many young Irish people like Nellie, the question became no longer, how do I build a future here? But how do I get out? Nellie's family carried a reputation throughout the area: independent, proud, difficult to intimidate. One local story claimed the parish priest himself had once excommunicated Nellie's father after a dispute involving property. Whether every detail was true almost didn't matter anymore. The story survived because it captured something real about them. They did not back down easily. Nellie inherited that trait completely. For a poor Irish girl at the turn of the century, there were only a handful of possible paths upward. One of them led across the Irish Sea to England. Young Irish women travelled to London to work as domestic servants inside wealthy English homes. The work was exhausting and lonely. Irish servants were often looked down upon, treated as lesser, uneducated, rough. In some circles, merely sounding Irish could close doors before they ever opened. But England offered wages, and wages meant possibility. So Nellie left Ireland, alone. She crossed into a society where she was doubly underestimated, first because she was Irish, and second because she was a woman. Inside English estates, she cleaned floors, carried trays, polished silver, made beds, and remained mostly invisible in rooms built for other people's comfort. But Nellie was paying attention, watching, learning, saving every penny she could. Some employers quietly allowed Irish servants access to informal lessons or reading instruction on days off. For someone from a people who had spent generations excluded from power and advancement, even small opportunities mattered. Nellie absorbed everything she could. And somewhere during those years in England, a larger dream began taking shape. America. Not because America was welcoming. It wasn't. Anti-Irish prejudice remained common there too. Newspapers frequently portrayed Irish immigrants as dirty, ignorant, violent, or drunk. Irish need not apply signs had only recently begun disappearing from storefronts and businesses. But America offered something Ireland and England often did not: movement. A person could rise there, at least sometimes. So Nellie made a decision that would alter the course of every generation that followed her. She bought a steamship ticket to America. The money was short. Something had happened, perhaps hardship, perhaps desperation, perhaps urgency. The exact details disappeared with time. What remained was the choice. Nellie took what she needed from the family store, and she left. She did not ask permission. She did not wait for certainty. She left. That was the moment her ordinary world ended, and the journey began. Her first stop was New York City. A priest back in Tipperary had arranged work for her inside the Manhattan home of a wealthy banker. It was supposed to be safe passage into American life. It wasn't. Years later, the family would describe the banker as becoming too friendly with Nellie. She did not argue. She did not make a scene. She quietly gathered her belongings and left. Once again, Nellie refused to accept the role someone else had chosen for her. She boarded a train west to Chicago. There, a young Irish immigrant named Bill was already building a life. Nellie had likely known Bill back in Ireland. Church gatherings in rural Tipperary had been the centre of social life, and somewhere amid those gatherings, their paths had crossed. Whether it was love at first sight or something slower and steadier, no one can now say for certain. What is certain is this: Chicago became the place where their futures joined together. At the turn of the 20th century, Chicago was exploding with energy. Railroads thundered into the city from every direction. Steel mills glowed through the night. The stockyards processed unimaginable volumes of meat. Immigrants from across Europe crowded the streets, speaking dozens of languages. It was loud, competitive, chaotic, alive. Bill found work as a streetcar conductor, a respectable position hard-won by earlier generations of Irish immigrants who had fought their way upward from the very bottom of American society. Anti-Irish prejudice still existed. So did anti-immigrant resentment generally. But Chicago also rewarded hustle, toughness, and risk-taking. And Nellie possessed all three. They married in June of 1909 with almost nothing. Everything they built after that, they built themselves. Their daughter, Dette, was born the following year. Then, shortly afterward, Nellie did something remarkable. She returned to Ireland. With her infant daughter in tow, she travelled all the way back to Tipperary and walked into the family store she had left behind years earlier. And she repaid every dollar she had taken, with interest. No one could have forced her to do it. An ocean separated her from her old life now. The debt could simply have disappeared into history. But that wasn't Nellie. Whatever guilt or conflict she had carried with her across the Atlantic, she refused to leave unresolved. Then she returned once more to Chicago. Back home, Bill worked long hours and quietly saved money for months. He wanted to surprise Nellie with something beautiful for her birthday: a piano. She loved music, loved playing. Bill proudly brought it home. And one day he returned from work to discover the piano was gone. Nellie had sold it. She used the money as the down payment on their first investment property. Bill probably stood there in stunned silence for a moment, and then most likely laughed, because by then he understood exactly who he had married. Nellie flipped that property, then another, then another. Soon she began holding them instead of selling them. Rental units, storefronts, apartments across Chicago's West Side. In an era when women were expected to stay inside the home, Nellie entered the rough, male-dominated world of real estate and business negotiations. And she succeeded, massively. Tenants lined up at her office to pay rent. Contractors worked under her direction. Deals were negotiated in rooms where most people likely assumed the Irish immigrant woman in the corner couldn't possibly be the one making the decisions. They were wrong. The Chicago Real Estate Board eventually recognized Nellie as the West Side real estate genius, an Irish immigrant woman, a former servant, a girl once born into poverty in rural Tipperary, now one of the most successful property operators on Chicago's West Side. But then, tragedy struck the family when Nellie and Bill's young daughter, Lolta, suffered terrible burns in a household accident involving a candle. She did not survive. The grief devastated the family. For a time, Nellie stopped working entirely, but eventually As she always had before, she continued forward. She kept building. She purchased the old gardener's house on the Selfridge estate in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, property once tied to Gordon Selfridge, the great retail magnate who revolutionized department stores in London. The irony would not have been lost on history. The Irish servant girl who once worked inside English estates now owned part of one. Summers at the lake became treasured family memories. Her daughter Dette remembered them for the rest of her life. It was never about the money for Nellie. It was just a tool she used to challenge herself, increase the number of choices she had, and to ensure the people she loved were well fed, safe, and would be optimally prepared to make their own choices in life. Choices which were based on their hard work, their abilities and their interests, not those which were forced upon them. Even with 4 children of her own, Nellie regularly took in children from families facing difficult times. Many of them later mirrored Nellie's attitude towards life, as they went on to found an airline, build shopping malls, run Columbia Pictures, consult US presidents, own a horse which ran in the Kentucky Derby, and help establish a cancer research center. Her daughter Dette also fully embraced Nellie's trial and error attitude. She loved horseback riding and competitive show jumping, a sport demanding courage, discipline, and calm under pressure. And remarkably for a woman of that era, she attended college. At a time when fewer than 1% of American women earned college degrees, Dette became one of them. Then came 1929. The stock market collapsed. Banks failed by the thousands. Businesses folded, workers lost jobs, families stopped paying rent because they no longer could. Nellie's empire, built property by property over 20 years, suddenly stood on unstable ground. But once again, Nellie adapted. She studied financing and restructuring. She slowly learned how to preserve properties during economic catastrophe. Even in the face of collapse, she kept moving. Then came the appendicitis attack. She was rushed to the hospital. Lying in her hospital bed, Nellie quietly told Dette that she would not survive. Her daughter refused to believe it. The operation had gone well. Doctors felt optimistic. The following evening, Dette brought a young man to meet her mother. His name was Dick Martin, and they had met at the grotto at Notre Dame. He was a law student at the University of Illinois and one of the finest collegiate golfers in the country, winning back-to-back Big Ten championships with a composure that reporters admired deeply. Dick himself came from another branch of the Irish story. His father, Sam Martin, had immigrated from Belfast after being told as a young boy that he was not smart enough for formal education. Instead of surrendering to that judgment, Sam learned carpentry, immigrated to America, and eventually founded a successful construction company whose buildings would later appear on the National Register of Historic Places. Another immigrant story, another refusal to accept limits. But Nellie's own journey was nearing its end. Doctors at the time believed surgical patients should remain motionless in bed during recovery. They did not yet understand the deadly danger of blood clots. Nellie developed one, and then she was gone. The poor girl from Tipperary, who wouldn't let other people's opinions of her because of her age, gender, or race stop her from trying new things in order to give herself and those she loved better options in life. The girl who repaid her debts. The girl who overcame many shortcomings and failures. The girl who took in others because she knew what struggle was gone. But the story did not end with her passing, not even close. You see, after Nellie's death, Dette suffered a devastating riding accident when a frightened horse reared and collapsed backward onto her. Doctors believed she would die. When she survived, they told her she would never walk again. But Dette had Nellie's DNA, so she fought, step by painful step, surgery after surgery. And eventually Dette walked again. Then they told her she would never have children. Well, she married Dick Martin, and she had children. Those children had children. And those children eventually led to you. This is your inheritance, not wealth, not perfection, not ease, but resilience, to go on through tragedy. The refusal to accept the story someone else writes for you. That is Nellie's spirit, and it's running through your veins.